Cyberpunk, The Flame That Remains. Written and read by Ethan Taplin. Chapter 15. Naglfar, Night City 2075. Sophie stood at the rail, eyes fixed on the shadow rising ahead of them like a leviathan called from memory. The Naglfar waited, silent, dark, and vast. Fog skimmed the surface of the bay, curling low around its hull like it was breathing. It bore no colors, no signal lights, not even any markings of the corp it belonged to. It didn't need them. The only marking on the ship was beneath the bridge tower. Carved deep into the hull like a wound that would never heal lay the Valnut. 3 interlocking triangles carved into the steel, the knot of the dead. For the rest of the corp, it served to mark the ship as Ursa's personal vessel. To Sophie and her siblings, it represented ownership of a different kind. Not a badge of command, but a brand that would never let them forget who had built them. Sophie's gaze didn't waver. She shifted her stance, scanning the length of the hull for anything, an access hatch, a maintenance ladder, or an anchor chain. Anything that might let them board without broadcasting their arrival. "See anything?" Ares asked, quietly from the helm, voice low to prevent it carrying across the water. "There," Sophie said, pointing. "Midship. Below the bulkhead break. That panel's been reworked. Maybe resealed after the corp retrofitted the ship. If that's what I think it is." Mael stepped up beside her, lifting his scope. "Yeah, looks like an old launch hatch. Could have been for drones or divers back when it was a military vessel." "If it's not in active use, we might be able to slice it open manually without setting off the alarm," Liv said. She was sitting on the deck, leaning against the helm, one hand gently pressed against the dressing that Dr. Navarro had bound the wound in her side with. "It won't be easy, but I think I can get us in," Ares said. "Do you have a plan to anchor us to the other ship so we can work?" Mael smiled. "I've got us covered. Just bring us in close, Ares." "Sure." Ares brought the boat in slowly and quietly alongside the massive ship. He cut the engine and let them drift the last few meters to the hatch. As the boat reached the desired position, Mael stepped up to the rail, swung a leg over, and straddled it. He leaned out and planted his left foot on the hull of the Naglfar as though he was going to push them away from the ship. His shoes were ripped to shreds as he engaged the weapons hidden in his cybernetic legs. Large talons unfolded from his feet and latched into the upper deck of the speedboat and the Naglfar's hull. Mael gripped the railing as he acted as a tether between the two vessels. "I never would have guessed that's what you were planning," Ares grinned as he released the helm. He clapped Mael on the shoulder as he passed him on his way to the hatch. "How long can you hold us here?" "As long as you need." Ares didn't waste any time. He crouched by the hatch, running his hand along the rusting edge. "Definitely not in use. And definitely not network accessible." Sophie stepped up beside him, examining the seam in the metal. "This is old pre-war tech. 2010s, maybe? We'll have to cut in manually." "No other way in?" Liv asked, adjusting her position on the deck to watch from where she sat. "Not that I could see," Sophie sighed. "Even the couple of times we used the Naglfar for our missions, we always boarded and deployed by AV. I'm not even sure in what manner we'd board this thing from the water if we weren't trying not to get caught." Ares ran a hand through his hair. "We're going to have to open this up the old-fashioned way, it seems." He moved to the back of the boat and grabbed his bag from one of the seats. He brought it back to where Sophie and Mael were waiting and began to dig around inside. After a moment, he withdrew a compact cutting torch, one of the many tools he and Sophie had collected from his apartment before returning to the clinic. He thumbed the torch to life. A bright, concentrated beam hissed from the nozzle, its flame casting a sharp blue glow against the side of the Naglfar. "I hope you're all ready," he said. "This won't be subtle." Sophie nodded, already scanning the water around them. Her hand rested just above the holster clipped to her thigh. Mael shifted slightly, readjusting his posture to ensure that the speedboat held still and Ares would have as easy a job as possible. Go for it. Cut quickly. The longer you take, the more likely that we get caught. Ares pressed the torch to the hull, the blue beam reducing the steel to molten slag easily, but only a little at a time. The orange blobs hissed as they fell into the water below. Liv rose to her feet, assisted by Astrid. She gripped the rail tightly as they moved to the front of the boat with the others. Once we're inside, the first thing we need to do is find the server room and destroy the data fort to cut Prosopon off from the ship. Once the AI is out of the picture, we can override the ship controls at the helm. Ares, Astrid, you'll come with me to the helm. Mael, you go with Sophie. No, Ares interjected. I'm going with Sophie. He was almost done cutting, but lifted the torch as he turned to face Liv. Mael's clearly equipped for a fight, and he's definitely faster on his feet than I am, but that's all the more reason for him to go with you, Liv. You're clearly not at the top of your game yet. He gestured to the wound she was still pressing her hand to. Besides, Sophie and I have done this sort of thing together before. We work well together, have a system. I'll keep her covered while she works. There was no tension, no abrasive edge in his voice, just certainty. He turned back to the hull without waiting for Liv's reply. Sophie met Liv's eyes for a moment, confirming Ares' words with a small nod. A heavy thud rang out as the cut panel gave way and fell inward, clanging against the inner deck. The scorched edges of the opening still glowed, the metal cooling in jagged lines. Ares stood back, torch lowered. Showtime, he said. Sophie stepped up, taking his place. All right, Mael, Astrid, you're with me, Liv said as Sophie stepped over the gap. She nodded to Ares. Good luck in there. Ares nodded silently, then followed Sophie over the gap. The Naglfar swallowed them whole. Inside, the Naglfar was dead quiet. The hatch led to a narrow maintenance corridor, the walls scuffed and utilitarian. The air was cool, dry, and metallic, and laced with the faint smell of ozone and old oil. Their boots made little sound against the grated floor as they advanced. Sophie led the way, with Ares close behind. They had split up from the others shortly after their infiltration. Mael led the twins up a flight of stairs toward the bridge. Liv was still clutching at her side, but no longer needed Astrid's help to walk. Sophie and Ares had taken a different path, leading them further into the bowels of the ship. They moved in practiced sync, checking corners, clearing each space as they went. The hallway widened, spilling into a low-ceilinged cargo chamber stacked with sealed crates and dormant lift gear. Dust covered everything. There were no blinking lights, no cameras tracking their movement, not even the hum of standby power. Just stillness. This is weird, Ares murmured as he swept his weapon left, then right. This whole section's powered down. I thought we were going to be walking into a fortress, fighting our way through at every step. But there's no one here. Obviously it's a trap, Sophie said. I'm just not sure how. Or for who. Even when the Nihimar had used the ship in the past, Ursa had left the crew and a complement of corporate soldiers aboard, despite the fact that her children were a secret to all but her most trusted inner circle. Sophie had never seen the ship empty like this. She swept her eyes across the room again, heart beating faster. No guards, no engineers or technicians, not even a single drone. Only the cargo, sealed and dusted over like relics of a forgotten war. You think she cleared the whole ship out? She might not need anyone else, Sophie replied. Not if Prosopon has taken control. I can't believe the AI would let the ship go without surveillance like this, though. So it's either watching from somewhere we can't see, or we might be wrong that it's got a presence on board? Sophie hesitated, eyes fixed on a nearby terminal embedded in the wall. Its display remained dark, but the casing bore faint signs of recent access. Streaks in the dust, scratches near the screws, and the screen had been wiped clean. Or someone else is watching us in its stead, she said quietly, pointing to the terminal. Ares followed her gaze. A corporate handler? Sophie shook her head. No, that wouldn't explain the lack of power. If they were working remotely, the whole ship would be given power, at least a small amount, so they could monitor the systems. We'd be seeing lockdowns and drones. We wouldn't have made it 2 steps inside. She tapped the screen, wiped free of dust. We wouldn't be seeing this. Someone is here then. We just haven't seen them. Ares grimaced, looking around the room again. Your siblings? Probably. Midgard, Helheim, Niflheim could be. Or Asgard. Or Asgard, Sophie confirmed. I think she's the least likely, though. We managed to hurt her pretty bad at the Volsung campus. Sophie eyed the terminal, her hand hovering near the access jack. I could use this to find out, she said. Whoever was here might notice, though. Ares wrapped his hand around hers, lowering his voice. Don't. We're already at a disadvantage, but we know it, which helps balance out the scale. Let's keep moving. Get to the data fort, cut Prosopon off, and you isolate the mainframe. Whoever's watching, whatever they're planning, we'll see it coming from there. Sophie nodded. She spared one last look at the terminal, then turned down the hallway beyond the cargo bay. Sophie had already been using the low light settings on her cyber eyes, but as they entered the access corridor, she was forced to switch to infrared. Pipes and conduit cables snaked along the length of the path, but it was otherwise empty and still. They moved in silence. At the far end of the corridor, Sophie was able to make out a heavy bulkhead door. As they approached, her infrared vision revealed that the door was 20 degrees warmer than the rest of the hallway. This is it, she said. The data fort is on the other side of this door. She moved to the door, placing her hand against it. From the other side, she could feel something humming. It reverberated through the door the same way the heat did. Ares responded by raising his weapon, watching her carefully. She reached for the manual override, but before she could pull the lever, the lights along the corridor flickered and surged to life. A sharp, rising tone pierced the silence. The bulkhead door burst open. On the other side stood 2 figures, tall, armored, unmistakable. The bulkhead closed again as Rune and Sigrid crossed the threshold. Helheim and Niflheim. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. Then Sigrid launched herself forward. She moved faster than Sophie remembered she could. There was no warning. One moment she stood still, the next she was airborne, cyber legs propelling her into a low, arcing leap across the corridor. She hit the ground with enough force to crack the floor panels, landing in a slide that brought her within striking distance before either Sophie or Ares could react. Sophie barely dodged the first punch. The second glanced off her shoulder hard enough to send her spinning. Sigrid didn't look like a heavy hitter, but she struck with the force of a freight train and moved with such speed that Sophie began to worry she'd need her Sandeva stand to even balance the scales. Sigrid had to have jump boosters in her legs, and the crushing impact of her fists suggested a synthetic muscle weave, or gorilla arms. Maybe both. Ares stepped forward, trying to place himself between Sophie and Sigrid, but she was on him before he could raise his weapon. Her foot slammed into his chest, sending him sprawling. Sophie's instincts screamed. She tried to draw her pistol, but Sigrid knocked it from her hand, then grabbed her by the front of her suit and lifted her clean off the floor. Sigrid said nothing as she glared at Sophie. Her expression was enough. Sophie saw anger and sadness in her eyes, too much for her to speak. It had boiled over, and all Sigrid could do now to release it was fight. Sophie felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She knew this entire situation had come about because of her, but like Sigrid, she had no choice now but to fight. Sophie grabbed at her left wrist, trying to pull her monowire free, but was unsuccessful. Sigrid snarled and flung her toward the bulkhead. Sophie crashed into it and crumpled. The world spun around her. She tried to stand, tasting blood in her mouth as she struggled to her feet. Can't win like this. Ares rose to his feet at the same time as Rune stepped forward, closing the distance, a long sword blade gleaming in one hand. Ares didn't give him a chance. He leapt forward into a roll, the blade missing by inches. As he came to his feet once more, Ares spun and lashed out. His arms had unfolded, splitting open to reveal the pop-up weapons that Sophie had long suspected him of hiding. From each arm, a collapsible, razor-sharp scythe-like weapon snapped forward. The mantis blades gleamed wickedly. Rune didn't flinch. He stepped into Ares' attack with deliberate precision, parrying one mantis blade with a curved forearm guard, and catching the second with the flat of his sword. Sparks flashed as steel met steel. Rune twisted, shifting his weight, and slammed the hilt of his blade into Ares' ribs, knocking the wind from his lungs. Ares staggered back, gritting his teeth. Sophie had her back against the wall, ducking and weaving between Sigrid's strikes, but only barely avoiding them. She had managed to tug the monowire from its slot in her wrist, but had no room to maneuver it. She was so preoccupied by dodging Sigrid's attacks that she almost didn't notice that Rune had leveled one against her at the same time. Too late, she raised a barrier against his quick hack. Sparks shot from the ports behind her ears. At the same time, Sigrid landed a blow on her cheek. Sophie's head flew backwards and hit the wall. She was suddenly very grateful that a large portion of her skull was no longer bone. Sigrid caught her before she could slump to the ground, lifting her by the front of her yukata. "Is that all you've got?" Sigrid screamed. "That's it, Muspelheim!" She slammed Sophie backward into the wall. Her Sandevistan was screaming in her mind, telling her she had only one way to survive. "I thought you'd put up a fight at least. You bested Prosopon and escaped after all." Her voice dropped low. "Or maybe you were only any good because you were Mother's favorite." Ares lunged at Rune again. He was desperate to help Sophie, but he knew if he had turned to attack Sigrid, it would give Rune an opportunity to use more complicated programs, and they would both be dead. Instead, he gave up on defense. Ares spun, kicking at Rune's hand and lashing out with the mantis blades. He could feel Rune loading a demon into his systems even as he struck at him. Rune's blade went flying as the kick connected, but he still dodged out of the way of Ares' blades. Ares could feel the surge of energy building in his chrome. He had one more chance to stop Rune before he would be incapacitated. A flash of text appeared in his sight, a message from Sophie. "Now!" Just in time, he understood. A burst of sparks erupted from Rune's arm. He glanced down at the malfunctioning cyberware, then Sophie, dawning realization clear in his expression. Her quick hack gave Ares the opening he needed. Even as Rune's own hack took effect, fuzzing his vision, Ares made use of Sophie's distraction. The first blade drove through Rune's chest. The second tore out his side. He collapsed in a wet gasp. Sigrid screamed. The sound was not one of grief, but pure, animalistic, all-consuming rage. Her cybernetics lit red beneath her skin as she activated her berserk implant. Her pupils grew, nearly eclipsing her irises. Her movements became heavier, more powerful. She dropped Sophie to the floor and lunged at Ares. He was reeling, vision still fuzzy. Sigrid grabbed Ares and threw him into the wall hard enough to dent it. The Sandevistan screamed again. Sophie blinked hard. Time slowed around her. "Fine. Now or never." The Sandevistan flared to life. Her pulse flattened. The edges of the world stretched and warped as everything around her snapped into hyper-clarity, taking on a viridescent sheen. Sigrid turned her head, but too slowly now. Sophie moved. She hit the deck, rolled, and retrieved her pistol in a single, breathless motion. She fired the weapon mid-roll and was on her feet before Sigrid had finished blinking. Then she charged. She was enveloped in silence, the speedware kicking her so far into overdrive that the only thing outpacing her now was light. Sigrid had barely moved. Her expression, twisted with fury, was frozen mid-contortion. One foot still hovered above the floor, halfway through a step. The air shimmered around Sigrid's cyberlegs as the jump boosters tried to prime. Too slow. Sophie caught up to and stepped past the bullet fired from her own gun. It spun lazily toward Sigrid's right shoulder without a care in the world. She circled behind Sigrid in a breathless instant and pulled the monowire free. One step, another, the world dragged behind her. She drew the filament tight. 3 rapid strikes. The first severed the neural leads in Sigrid's lower spine. The second flayed the actuator housing behind her left shoulder. The third buried deep into the external casing of the berserk implant at the nape of her neck, superheated wire melting clean through it until it kissed the chrome underneath, with a final, blinding spark. The light inside Sigrid's body stuttered. Her breath hadn't even finished yet. Her scream was cut short. The berserk module flared once more, then failed. Sophie disengaged the Sandevistan. Sound slammed back into her like a collapsing wave. Everything around her burst into motion at once. A spray of blood erupted from Sigrid's shoulder as the bullet remembered it could move. Ares' body finally landed below the new dent he had left in the wall. Sigrid crashed to the floor, her legs giving out beneath her. Her breath came in short, broken gasps. Smoke coiled from the wreckage of her implants, the scorched housing still sizzling with heat. Sophie stood over her, shaking, as her pulse roared in her ears, fast and ragged. Sigrid twitched once, then went still. The air stank of ozone, blood, and burnt chrome. No one spoke. Sophie turned to find Ares, half risen, one knee on the floor and blood in his teeth. He stared at her, awe and relief in his eyes. Sophie didn't meet his gaze. The Sandevistan's screams still echoed in her thoughts.